All right. Uh, Continuing on. So, yesterday we talked about ferns and how ferns had evolved over bryophytes and mosses. Their big development was vascular tissue, xylem, which carries water and minerals up in the plant, and phloem, which carries food, sugars that the plant makes up or down throughout the plant, water and sugars throughout the plant. The waters they're used to move the sugars around. It would be just sugar if it was so. That's phloem. It goes everywhere, and the xylem and phloem they also help hold the plant up. They have the cells of the xylem and phloem. This vascular tissue can hold the plant up, so the plant can be taller. And the plant can be taller now because it draws the water and minerals out of the ground and brings them up to the leaves, to the photosynthetic tissues that are up high. And if you're higher, you get more sun, you can make more food, and you're higher than your neighbors, you're higher than those mosses and bryophytes. So that's the big evolve of ferns over bryophytes and those stomata. Don't forget those stomata, those cells. And how those stomata cells work is when because the plants don't have like a nervous system. They can't be like, I better close my stomata, and then the plants don't do that. They don't know you're talking to them and stuff. I know there's things, but they don't know. They have no way to know. So how those stomata works is those cells, when they're swollen with water, they open, because that means there's lots of water in the plant. So the stoma open and water can evaporate out. It can do that transpiration. Remember, the transpiration is where the polarity of water molecules, because water molecules are attracted to each other, pulls the water up. And that's how water flows up the xylem. It's like a chain of water being attracted to water because it's it's polar. And so when they're swollen, they're open, and water can transpire out, can evaporate out, and then also oxygen comes out. The other important thing that the stomata are responsible for is also oxygen, which is the product of photosynthesis, can come out, and CO2, carbon dioxide, can come in. Because carbon dioxide is needed for photosynthesis, so carbon dioxide comes in. That carbon dioxide, those carbons, are what gets converted into the sugars. So plants are actually made out of air. They're made out of greenhouse gas, carbon dioxide. So when the plant has lots of water, those stomata swell and then they're open. When they start to dry out, when the plant dries out, when they dry out, those stomata, they close. And that's the way the plant holds water in. It can keep water in that way. That's how it's like an automatic way of preventing it from drying out. So, vascular tissue, stomata, and now ferns have roots. Some ferns have roots. Not all of them have roots. They're not like the greatest roots in ferns. So roots can't grow really that big because they don't have a huge root system. But our next family of trees, or class or order of trees, is Gymnosperms. And these are huge. They're ancient and they're big and they live for a very long time. So they took ferns' vascular tissue and said, we're running with it as far as you can go. We're going to use that vascular tissue to grow huge. But in order to grow really huge, remember, we had to solve some problems. When we're on land, plants evolved coming out of the water. When we're on land, we need support. And one of the things we need support is we need to anchor into the ground. So roots. Gymnosperms have really evolved roots. And what they do with those roots is they use them for absorption. So they absorb water into the roots. Roots are the main water-absorbing plant organ. You know when people go, like they take a little spray bottle and they go pss, 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 around their plant, and they're like, oh, pss, 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 pss. That does nothing. It's not doing anything. The plant is like, yeah, that's nice. You're cooling me off. I guess it will cool the plant off. It could actually, and it will prevent water from evaporating out of the plant in a way, because it makes it humid around the plant. Remember I said transpiration is slowed down when it's humid because the air is already saturated with water, so the water can't evaporate out of the plant. But the water's not going into the plant. Most plants have a waxy cuticle. That's the other thing that plants evolved eventually. So ferns have this. Definitely gymnosperms have a waxy covering around their leaves, so that water cannot evaporate out. Gymnosperms thrive in arid, dry areas. So these are big, huge evergreen trees, are gymnosperms. Big, huge, giant trees. The rainforest that we have here, up on mountainsides, gymnosperms. So remember, we moved out of the water. We were mosses living in wet areas. Then we were ferns. We had ferns living. They still need moist area because their sperm needs to swim, so they still need to live in a kind of a semi-shady, wet area. But there's all this earth. There was all this earth to take over. There were no animals yet, or at least, there was virtually no animals. No birds and things like that. No, nothing really advanced. So plants were like, we got to take over the rest of the earth. And that's where gymnosperms come in. So what you get are, so we evolve huge roots, main organ for absorption. So we can absorb and go deep into the water and suck up lots and lots of water. And how they suck up that water is they use osmosis to suck up that water. So what happens is roots absorb minerals out of the soil. They actively transport them. So they have proteins, enzymes on the surface of the roots that actively use energy to pull minerals in. So now the root, the inside of the root, has lots of minerals in it, which means it's hypertonic. We haven't really talked about what does hypotonic means. It basically, hypertonic means that you have more solute in a solvent. And in our case here, it's always water. The solvent is water. So if you have more salt in water, in a thing of water next to a thing of less salt in a thing of water, that thing with lots of salt is hypertonic. And if you have a semi-permeable membrane, which is what the skin of the roots is, a semi-permeable membrane, water will move to the hypertonic solution, to the place where there's more mineral. It will move to try to equalize the concentration. That's just what happens. So what happens is, because essentially the roots are saltier, water will go into the roots to try to equalize the concentration, because the roots are hypertonic. And it goes into the roots and it enters the xylem, and then it enters the xylem and is like, oh no, I was trying to equalize the concentration, but now I'm in the xylem and I'm being pulled along by transpiration. I'm being now sucked up, and out I go into the air. That's what happens to water. Roots also attach plants to the soil so they don't get blown away. That's how trees can grow so big, because they have huge roots in the ground. You've seen trees that have been blown over, I'm sure, and then a huge chunk of the earth will be pulled up and a giant root system will be sticking out. And the roots are also used for food storage, so they can store starches in the roots. So those will be like carrots and onions and beets. You'll have big swelling places where starch is stored in the roots, and then we steal them and eat them. So roots really, ferns had roots already. Some of them didn't, some of them did, but now we've got really giant roots. That's a big jump here in gymnosperms. The other thing that gymnosperms have done, if we're moving out of these wet and shaded areas, we have the problem of the sperm. The sperm is and always needs water. So we got to do something with the sperm. And what gymnosperms evolved is seeds, and pollen. So instead of having the sperm swim, now the sperm are contained in grains, in pollen grains. So let's talk about this. Let's talk about spores and seeds and things like that. Okay, so gymnosperms. They've got, for support, to do their support business, thick vascular tissue, stems, branches, large roots that can go very deep. To deal with the dehydration problem, because now we're living everywhere. We're living right in the sun. We can get sun all the time. We don't need this shade. We don't need moist soil. Well, we need still water in the soil, but we don't need extremely moist soil for sperm to swim. We're going to have vascularization, so water can move through the plant. Really thick, waxy cuticle protecting on plant surfaces like the leaves and the stems, so water can't evaporate out. And we've modified leaves. So gymnosperms have like needles, right? Conifers, Christmas trees have needles, and those are modified. They're sort of rolled up leaves. There's different kinds, and they have a really thick, waxy cuticle on them. So those stoma are really important, letting air out, because that's the only way for water and CO2 and air to oxygen to get out. And we evolve pollen, so pollen grains. And how it works is gymnosperms have cones. They've modified their leaves into cones. So they got those needles, and then they also have leaves that are modified into cones. And what happens is the gametes grow inside the cones. So remember we talked about sporophyte and gametophyte, haploid, diploid. So when you look at a Christmas tree or at a big, huge sequoia redwood, those are sporophytes. That is the sporophyte. And the gametophyte is actually inside the cones. So what they've done is it's no longer a separate thing that like goes somewhere and, there's spores that go out and the spores turn into a gametophyte. Spores are done with. There's no spores anymore. No spores. The gametophyte is basically contained in the sporophyte. It lives on the sporophyte. It lives in the cone. And so the cones contain the gametophyte, and they provide protection for the gametophyte. And what happens is the gametes grow in the cones. So you have male cones and female cones. And one tree will have both male cones and female cones. It'll have both kinds of cones. And what happens is the male cones are lower down on the tree. The female cones are higher up. Make sure I get that right. Yes. And the male cones are at the tip of the branches, and the female cones are sort of further in, and they're higher up on the tree. This prevents inbreeding. So the female cones have the ovum inside. They have the egg inside, the female gamete, and the male cones are on lower branches hanging out. When wind blows and it's time, the male cones open up and pollen goes flying out. I'm sure you've seen yellow dust, yellow powder. Those of you who are allergic to that stuff, I'm very happy I'm not allergic to that stuff, have seen it's probably the bane of your existence is this yellowy dust. That's trees having sex. You're covered in tree sperm, basically, when that pollen comes flying around. So pollen grains contain the male gametes. The sperm is in there. It's not really sperm. It's just the half the male chromosomes are in there. And by having it lower down, when the pollen blows away, it's less likely to be blown up and into the female cones, the same cones of the same tree. So you're not getting incest. You're not getting that inbreeding where you're getting, the same, you're losing genetic variety that way. Here, the pollen can go and it can go land on another tree. It can get blown up and land far, far away, be blown by wind, and land on female cones in another tree. These grains can fly really far. They're tiny, right? Pollen grains are tiny. They go far and far and far. So, and these trees are huge and tall. They've been under selective pressure to be taller and taller and taller, so they can fight their neighbors. They can be taller than their neighbors and kill all the other plants. Remember, I've said I don't like gymnosperms. They didn't evolve with animals. They don't like us. They rule, they take over a forest and basically get taller and outcompete themselves. They're beautiful. I love walking in the forest, but they're vicious plants. And they also suck up all the nutrients like forest ground in a forest. They are nice. Trees are nice. Even different species of trees in a forest of gymnosperms, they actually kind of chemically communicate, and they can help each other. That's been shown now scientifically in the last few recent years. They can actually send minerals to each other, and because the health of the forest is an evolutionary advantage to have a healthy forest. But they don't provide a lot of food. There's no fruit or food in a gymnosperm forest. There's nothing for animals to eat. I mean, you could kind of eat the cones or whatever, but they're hanging on to all the energy, all the minerals and stuff. So let's talk about the life cycle of a tree. Talked about it a little bit already. So it gets funky. So you're looking at a big, huge tree. That's the sporophyte. Sporophytes, remember, are diploid, 2N. Inside the sporophyte, inside the cones, is where the gametophyte lives. And the gametophyte here isn't anything significant. It's just making the gametes. There's no spores. So the sporophyte, the big sporophyte, in the cones through meiosis makes ovules, makes female cones, and makes, through meiosis, male cones, which contain pollen grains. And each pollen grain will actually contain a number of male gamete nuclei, not just one. And what happens is the male wind comes along or whatever, it's time, the male cones, the pollen blows everywhere, and it lands in the female cones of another tree. And it will fertilize in the female cone. It can like, is that in these, from the pollen grain, sperm are actually released from the pollen grain. And they will fertilize the ovum inside the female cone. And then that grows into a zygote. And the zygote then turns into a seed. So female cones then contain a seed, and the seed has food reserves. It actually eats the female gametophyte. So there's a little bit of food reserve. And so what happens then when you see those little things those little helicopters come flying down, that's the tree's seeds. There's different kinds, but that's the seed. So pollen has flown around, that grain has flown around, and now the little helicopters come flying around, and those are fertilized seeds. And they are diploid. Remember, after fertilization, it's diploid. And the seed lands in the soil, and every other one will sprout into a new tree. Some of them will sprout into new trees if the conditions are right for them. So have a look at this when you guys get a chance. So there you go. You can see all the there's the steps. See, there's the little pollen grains. There's the ovule. So that's inside the female cone, fertilization happening. Zygote, and a little seed, a little embryo of a tree. So seeds and spores are different because there's a nice little table here. So a spore just doesn't have any food supply. It's just a single cell. It's just the diploid single cell. It has to grow immediately where it lands, or nothing will happen. And it has to find its own food, basically. It's got to land somewhere where there's going to be something for it to use. And it's made by just mosses and ferns. And seeds are multicellular, so they're just like a more advanced. And they have the fertilized embryo in them, and a food supply, and a coating around them to protect that embryo. So they can actually last a really long time. They can last huge conditions. In Iceland, I think it's in Iceland, there is the seed vault. So people have gotten together and in the earth, deep into the earth, they built a seed vault. Basically, they've just taken food, seeds, and seeds from all over in case climate change is a total bust and it just destroys the planet. There's no more agriculture. These seeds will be locked away in this seed vault, and they can survive for a very long time. Seeds can survive for hundreds of years if nothing bad happens to them. Did I say spores? Spores are not haploid. Remember, spores are diploid. Spores are not. This is where it gets confusing. So, okay, here we go. Spores are haploid. Seeds are diploid. Spores are haploid. Seeds are diploid. So seeds have both sets of chromosomes because they're growing into a big sporophyte. Spores grow into the gametophyte. They are haploid. Oh dear. Anything else we need to say? So have a look at the stuff. We'll talk about dicot, monocot next time. Which is this Wednesday. So we will talk about angiosperms tomorrow. And then it looks like, and monocot, and then it looks like we're done the plants. So on Friday, we will do a quiz on Friday in flex time here. So we're done the plants thing, and then you guys just have the plants assignment over the break. Right now I'm just working on report cards. So before I finalize the plants assignment, I don't want to reuse the one exactly that I used last time. I want to make it a little bit easier. During flex time on Friday, we will have the quiz. I'll post about it. Make sure you tick it off and make sure you are able to do it. So do your review as we go, and I'll see you on Friday.